Hello, everyone. This afternoon, I will be presenting a webinar on GlobalGAP IFA Crops Certification Overview. My name is Lauren Maloney. I am the Food Safety Accreditation Manager for Perry Johnson Registrar's Food Safety, Inc., also known as PJRFSI. I am also the Scheme Manager and an Auditor for GlobalGAP. PJRFSI offers accredited third-party certification for the GlobalGAP standards. Today, I will provide an overview of their flagship standard, the IFA. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the question box and I will answer them at the end of the webinar. IFA stands for Integrated Farm Assurance. This standard covers good agricultural practices for agriculture, aquaculture, livestock, and horticulture production. GlobalGAP started in 1997 as GlobalGAP and included requirements for food safety, sustainable production methods, worker and animal welfare, responsible use of water, compound feed, and propagation materials. Over the next 10 years, the certification scheme spread throughout the continent and the world. In 2007, the company was renamed GlobalGAP to reflect its global reach and becoming the leading international good agricultural practice standard. Today, GlobalGAP IFA is currently on version 5.1, and there are certified producers in over 124 countries. IFA is a modular approach to the standard. The set of requirements that producers must follow can be found in the Control Points and Compliance Criteria, or CPCC. This document is broken down into different requirements depending on the scope of certification. All producers must follow the all farm-based requirements. Then the appropriate scope and sub-scope modules will follow. The scope modules include crop base, livestock base, and aquaculture base. Today we will follow the requirements of the crop base. Next, the appropriate sub-scope module will be added on to the requirements. This module covers the requirements for a particular product or a different aspect of the food production and supply chain. Under the crops module, the sub-scopes include fruit and vegetables, flowers and ornamental, combinable crops, plant propagation material, and hops. Fruit and vegetable sub-scope includes produce that will be used for fresh, cooked, or processed consumption. These include things such as cherries, potatoes, mushrooms, watermelons, and so on. This is GlobalGAP's most popular sub-scope with over 186,000 certified producers worldwide. Combinable crop sub-scope covers extensive crops that will be cooked or processed for consumption. This could include products such as soy, wheat, oats, millet, and so on. Hops is a new development that was recently added to the sub-scope category. It was developed in accordance with the Hops Growers of America, merchants, processors, and brewers around the world. This subscope addresses the unique needs for hop growers. Other subscopes include flowers and ornamentals, plant propagation material. This subscope covers best practices for nurseries, such as the production of seedlings for sale, and tea. This chart helps to explain the different requirements you must follow for certification, including all farm, scope, and subscopes. So for example, if you produce apples, you must comply with the all farm base, crops base, and fruit and vegetable subscope modules. If you produce peanuts, you must comply with the all farm-based, crops-based, and combinable crop subscope modules. If you raise chickens, you must comply with the all farm-based, livestock-based, and poultry subscope modules. A full product list with the product name, scientific name, and classification of subscope can be found on the GlobalGAP website. The product list has over 900 products, and it's not an exhaustive list, and new products can be added by request. GlobalGAP certification only covers products that are produced by the producers themselves. It does not cover wild catch, wild fish, or crops harvested in the wild. GlobalGAP defines a producer as an individual or business that is legally responsible for the production processes and the products relevant to the scope of certification that are sold by that person or business. GlobalGAP has 3 certification types under Option 1. The first is Option 1, Individual Certification. An individual producer applies for GlobalGAP certification, and the individual producer will be the certificate holder once certified. The second one is Option 1, Multi-Site Without Implementation of QMS. An individual producer or one organization owns several production sites that do not function as separate legal entities, and a quality management system, or QMS, has not been implemented. The third type is Option 1, Multi-Site with the implementation of QMS. An individual producer or one organization owns several production sites that do not function as separate legal entities, but where a quality management system has been implemented. And in this case, the QMS rules would also apply. The next is Option 2, a producer group. A producer group applies for a GlobalGAP group certification. Each producer will be a separate legal entity. This group of farms will form a group name and entity, and the group will be the certificate holder once certified. Each separate legal entity or farm will be listed on the certificate in the appendix. In this case, the quality management system must be implemented, and the General Rules Part 2 QMS requirements do apply. The advantage of implementing QMS in either Option 1, Multi-Site with QMS, or Option 2, Producer Group, is that only a sample of the producer members or sites will be audited by the certification body each year. A production area, such as fields, plots, ponds, ranches, that is owned or rented and ultimately managed by one legal entity, and where the same input factors, such as water supply, workers, equipment, stores, etc., are used. One site may contain several non-touching areas, areas that do not share a common border or are non-contiguous, and production of more than one product on the same site is possible. For example, a farm with a pack house, chemical storage, and equipment storage is used for 5 potato fields in a 10-mile radius. This could be considered one production area. A farm that has 3 mushroom growing houses at 3 different addresses, and each site has its own equipment storage, chemical storage, water sources, then this may be considered 3 different sites. All production sites where the products are included in the GlobalGAP certification scope are produced shall be identified and registered in the GlobalGAP database. All production sites shall be owned or rented under the direct control of the legal entity. For production sites that are not owned by the legal entity, the producer must have a signed document which includes a clear indication that the site owner does not have the responsibility or input or decision capacity regarding the production operations over the rented out site. The certificate holder is legally responsible for all the registered production, including placing the product on the market. GlobalGAP certification scheme documentation can be downloaded for free from the GlobalGAP website on their Document Center page. For a producer that would like to get certified to IFA, then you will need to follow General Regulations Part 1, which is a set of guidelines for the standard. If you are implementing QMS either as an Option 1 multi-site or an Option 2 producer group, then General Regulations Part 2, Quality Management System rules must be implemented. All IFA producers under the crop scope must also follow the crop rules. Then finally, the control points and compliance criteria defines the requirements of the standard for certification. The IFA checklist is an Excel document that can be used for the producer's self-assessment or internal inspection, and it will also be the same checklist used by the inspector for the inspection. The scope of certification will vary depending on the producer's unique operation. Harvest will be included in the scope of certification if the harvest takes place while the produce belongs to the producer. Harvest is only excluded if the produce is sold in the field prior to harvest taking place, or if the produce does not belong to the producer at some point prior to harvest commencing, and the producer has no control over the harvest process. This will be verified by PJRFSI during the application process, and the producer must have a contract with the buyer in this situation. Produce handling is the storage, chemical treatment, trimming, washing, or any other handling of the produce. Produce handling shall always be included in the scope of certification as long as the product belongs to the producer during handling or by the producer or subcontractor. Unless there's some written evidence, such as a contract agreement, that the producer has no control over the packing, handling, storage of the product, and that the produce is not returned to the producer, and the producer is not legally responsible for the product anymore. Produce handling will always be excluded if harvest is also excluded. Parallel production is a situation where individual producers, producer members, or producer groups grow the same product partly as certified and partly as non-certified. So if a farm grows both certified carrots and non-certified carrots, it is called parallel production. It is not considered parallel production if they are growing certified carrots but non-certified onions. This is a situation in which a farmer produces one product as certified and another product as non-certified. Again, this is not parallel production. Parallel ownership is where producers buy non-certified products of the same products they grow under certified production. So they grow carrots and they pack carrots, and then they also buy non-certified carrots. This would be an example of parallel ownership. It is not considered parallel ownership if a producer buys additional certified products or a certified producer handles products on a subcontract basis, meaning the producer does not own or sell the product. Preparing for certification. After signing a certification agreement with PJRFSI, we will register you on the GlobalGAP database, and you will receive a GlobalGAP number, or GGN. This number will not change even if you transfer or change certification bodies. This is your GlobalGAP identification number. You will be able to use that in your records to indicate certification, and you will also it will also be on your certificate. For initial certification, you must have at least 3 months of records for review. Types of records would include, but are not limited to, planting records, pesticide and fertilizer application records, training records, harvest records, and so on. For option 1, producers before the inspection must complete a self-assessment. For option 2, producer group certification, each group member must undergo a self-assessment and an internal audit of the QMS must be completed. The self-assessment shall cover all sites, products, and processes. It must be carried out under the responsibility of the producer, be carried out at least annually before the initial or subsequent inspections, and must be against the complete checklist. The self-assessment checklist shall contain comments of the evidences observed for all not applicable and non-compliant control points. The assessment process. GlobalGAP differentiates between an inspector and an auditor. Inspectors carry out an inspection to option 1 producers or option 2 producer group members. Auditors carry out audits to the quality management system of the option 2 producer group or the option 1 multi-site with quality management systems implemented. During the inspection or audit, the inspector or auditor completes the checklists of all the applicable scope and subscope. Each control point is classified as a major must, a minor must, or a recommendation. The inspection shall cover all accepted products and production processes, all registered production sites, each registered produce handling facility, if applicable, and where relevant, any administrative sites. The inspection duration shall allow for an opening meeting with the farm management, a complete evaluation of all standard requirements, and completion of the applicable checklists, and a closing meeting for the presentation of results to the producer. Inspection timing. For the initial certification, the inspector must witness harvest for all the products included in the scope of certification. If a product has not yet been harvested or has already been harvested and the inspector cannot witness harvest of that product, it cannot be included in the scope. However, it can be added on at a later date if the inspector returns to witness harvest of that product. In the case of certification for more than one crop, the crops may not all have the same seasonal timing. Harvest of one crop does not necessarily coincide with the harvest of other crops. The requirements for crop grouping is based on similarities in production and harvest processes and their risk. PJRFSI shall verify all control points of these groupings before the products can be added to the certificate. Crops may be grouped by the following. They could either be mechanically harvested, which means the only method of harvesting is mechanical. In this case, there's no need to observe the harvest for all while in operation. It is sufficient to check only the machine and harvest machine operation records after the harvest for the additional crops. For manual harvest of low-risk products can also be grouped. These products may include always cooked before eating or always cleaned before eating, dry nuts, products with inedible skin, products with pathogen reduction step after harvest. Another crop grouping could include manual harvest of high-risk products, harvest that involves ice or water, and packing in field. So for example, a visit during apple harvesting is not required when apples are being added to certification scope that already includes pears. However, the apples can only be added to the certificate once all control points applicable to them have been verified. However, adding spinach to the certification scope would require an assessment during the spinach harvest period. Subsequent inspections or recertification. For subsequent inspections, the inspection shall be carried out at a time when relevant agronomic activities and/or handling are being carried out. Inspection timing shall allow PJRFSI to gain assurance that all registered crops, even if not all of them are present at the time of the inspection, are handled in compliance with the certification requirements. Inspections off-season or when farming activities are minimal shall be avoided. The inspection window is 8 months long, 4 months before the original expiration date of the certificate, and up to 4 months after the original expiration of the certificate. And there shall be a minimum period of 6 months between the two inspections for recertification. If produce handling is included in the certification scope, the produce handling facilities shall be inspected annually. This inspection shall be carried out while in operation. Only when PJRFSI has carried out a risk assessment that clearly shows that the risk is low, can produce handling be inspected during operation once every 2 years. The risk assessment should take into account the products being packed as well as any known food safety incidences related to the prospective products. Certification requirements. Certification requirements include compliance to 100% of all major must control points. For option 2, this also includes 100% of all QMS control points. For minor must control points, only 95% of the applicable control points need to be in compliance. Recommendations do not require compliance. Compliance can be achieved either at the time of inspection or from the submission of appropriate corrective actions. So for minor musts, the 5% that do not require compliance, corrective action is not required. Corrective actions for initial certification are due within 3 months of the last day of the inspection. If the corrective actions are not received by the due date, then the certification inspection will be repeated. Corrective actions for recertification are due within 28 days from the last day of the inspection. If the corrective actions are not received by the due date, then the non-compliance is written and the certificate may be suspended. PJRFSI will make the certificate decision within 28 days after the closure of any outstanding non-compliances and issue the certificate. The certificate cycle is valid for 12 months. However, depending on the subsequent inspection timing, PJRFSI may be able to extend the certificate up to 4 months after the expiration date. The producer must ask the CB for an extension in order to extend the certificate. Sorry about that. We will then upload the information to the GlobalGAP database and issue the certificate once any outstanding invoices are paid. The GlobalGAP database is a public database that shows certificate information. Database users can search by company name, GGN, or product type. Company name and address does not have to be public, and the producer may request PJRFSI to keep that information private. All other certificate information, however, must be made public. Thank you, everyone, for joining me today in the webinar. I hope it was informative. I'm happy to take any questions in the box. Since we don't have any questions, I'm going to end the webinar. Thank you again. Bye.